Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alexis Tai. I am one of 8 career specialists in the Career Center, liaison to the College of Engineering. Thank you so much for coming to the Engineering Career Open Forum. We're joined today with Grace Kim. She is a talent specialist. Is that the right title for you?
Talent acquisition partner.
Talent acquisition partner.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
No,
from Liferay, and I've been really fortunate to know Grace and be reacquainted with her at our career fair. So if you've met her before, that's maybe why she looks familiar. So Grace, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself a little bit.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. First of all, really excited to be here and meet some of you today. I am, like Alexis shared, I am the talent acquisition partner for all of North America at Liferay, meaning I get to recruit from intern levels all the way to senior director levels. So I get to meet people from all backgrounds, all life stages, all career trajectories. The reason why I love recruiting is because I get to really learn the story and narratives behind a person's story. I think a career is definitely a journey. So being able to even be a part of someone's journey on this side is really exciting. I'm really excited to share a little bit of some advice, some takeaways and action plans that you might be doing already, but it might be helpful to hear on the talent acquisition side what you can do in terms of job searching during this time. So again, thanks for having me. If you have any questions, are they going to be chatting or can they unmute themselves?
So I'm thinking that throughout the presentation, please do put your questions in the chat room, but afterwards when we're taking questions, you can also unmute yourselves. I think we're a small enough audience so we can kind of just do that. If you want to use the raise hand feature, I can call on you. Always my recommendation for when you're asking questions though is to preface it with your name, major, maybe school year or alumni status, just so I can introduce you properly, or you can introduce yourself to just give a little more context. Yeah, all right. So, and we do definitely want to hear all of your career concerns. So 100%, feel free to start putting those in the chat now if you would like to. And then Grace, would you just let me know when you want me to change the slides? And I think we can go ahead and get started.
Yeah, we can get started.
Great.
Oh, sorry. Okay, cool.
Good. Okay.
So during this time, something I've been speaking with career specialists such as Alexis and even other talent acquisition partners is we recommend candidates to take this time to prepare. Definitely, there are some companies out there, depending on the industries, that are hiring. There are companies that aren't right now, because of the crisis, but this time you can use this time to prepare, and I have some options for you on what you can work on. So next slide, please. So right now is something that will be monumental for your preparation is researching companies and industries. So even learning about industries that are possibly still thriving during this time. Also companies that you're interested in and seeing, okay, what is their mission, their vision, what are they doing right now? It does help to also research companies that are also hiring. So there's a lot of resources out there that are actually showcasing companies that are listing whether it's internships all the way to senior level to mid-level roles. So really taking this time to do some research, some soul searching even, and seeing what industries interest you and what industries are hiring. Because that might even help you really decide on your career search. So maybe you were interested in a certain industry, but like hospitality or retail, and you're like, okay, I'm not seeing a lot going on there. How can I pivot, and how can I still use my interest and my relevant skill set and qualifications into another industry? Because there are always ways to figure out overlap. Another thing is really taking the time to update your resume and LinkedIn profile. So even as you're attending, virtual expos, that might be something in the mix that you might see. I've been seeing that a lot. But what we do is we still check your LinkedIn profile while we communicate. And even when you reach out to people, something that might be helpful during this time is really updating your resume and your LinkedIn profile. You have Alexis here that can help you with that. Another thing that you can also practice during this time is your elevator pitch. It helps to write it out. It's kind of have you guys written a cover letter before? I don't know if there's like a feature where you can like do a thumbs up, but
thumbs up, I think.
Yeah. So elevator pitch is kind of like a cover letter, except it's out loud, right? You get to actually rehearse like who you are, introduce yourself, what you're interested in, and really taking the time to perfect your elevator pitch. So there's a lot of things that you can still do. It might not be effectively job searching, but what can you do to prepare yourself for the job search? And what's nice is that you have this buffer time to really focus on that and focus on your portfolio. So next slide, please. So another thing that you can do is network. So during this time, yes, a lot of companies that might not be hiring, but there are still industry professionals that are working. And willing to help, willing to listen, willing to share more about their expertise. So even using this time to research, learn, and also gain as much insight as possible. And I'll share a little bit more on the next slide. So networking, what does that look like? I know for some people, when you think of networking, you might think of a mixer, and also being dressed up really business casual, and then also doing a lot of small talk, right? It can seem a little scary, but I'm here to tell you networking doesn't have to be scary. It can actually just be a conversation. Something that I like to refer to is networking could be even like about asking directions, right? And I'm sure you've in the past have asked for directions, whether you've been traveling or when you're lost. Like you can ask a stranger along the way, how do I get to this place? Like I've done that all the time. I have no sense of direction, so I always end up asking people like, how do I get to this place, especially when I'm entering a new campus. So it's the same thing, applying it to networking. So instead of asking for directions, it's asking about their career journey. Something I might add is, I don't know if you noticed, but people love talking about themselves. So even using that to really learn about their story. So asking about how they got there, and also what's unique about your story. So maybe they are an engineering manager. So asking like, how did you get to that point? Or how did you know you wanted to get into that managerial role? So really asking about the career journey, not just like asking a transactional question. And that kind of brings me to my next point, which is all about building rapport and relationships. So really taking this time to build rapport, establish relationships with industry professionals. So instead of asking about opportunities right away, maybe even trying to find connections and common interests with this person. So something that I usually recommend is reaching out to people that are alumni. What's nice is Cal Poly has a huge network. I'm sure there's a lot of Cal Poly alumni on LinkedIn already that you can reach out to. Even on LinkedIn, there is, if you go to Cal Poly Pomona, there is an alumni section where you can actually even enter the year they graduated or the ranges of the graduation dates, and even figuring out the different industries. So that is already your common interest. Other common interest is maybe major. Maybe they studied the same major and got into the industry that you're interested in. Maybe you interned for the same company that person works for in the past. So there is a lot of ways that you can actually find that common interest, and that's another way you can build relationships. And maybe you might not find that internship or that job right away. But what you're doing is kind of doing that long-term job search where you're building that relationship. They're learning about you, they're learning about your interests, and there's also an opportunity for mentorship, right? So really learning insight and asking and guiding, because at least for me, with reaching out to alumni or industry professionals as I'm growing myself, there are people that are willing to help and give back. And that kind of brings me to my final point, is adding value for others. So really just information sharing. We can learn a lot from each other, and we can also help connect others with potential opportunities. So if you are talking to an industry professional and maybe you realize, okay, I'm not really interested in this field, but I know someone that is. And that's when you can kind of further connect. Yeah, so I hope that helps in kind of learning more about networking. I always want to break the stereotype of networking. It doesn't have to be as scary as it sounds. But yeah, next slide kind of shares a little bit more about what that could look like. So asking about that career journey, the formal language is informational interviewing. So I'm just going to read this quote out loud. A life design interview or an informational interview is incredibly simple. It just means getting someone's story. You want to talk to someone who is either doing and living what you're contemplating or has real experience and expertise in an area about which you have questions. So it's not a job interview. It's not an interview at all. It's really just a conversation. So that kind of summarizes my point about networking doesn't have to be a transactional encounter. It can be just really a conversation between two people that are interested in learning and providing insight. And then next slide, please. So I'm bringing this back to the audience. So what are some questions that you can ask when you're engaging with an employer or an industry professional when it comes to learning more about the industry?
Yeah, and in this case, I would say you can go ahead and unmute yourself, or you can drop your responses in the chat. Either way is totally fine.
I would say if you enjoy what you do.
Yeah, that's a great one. I love that. Yeah. And that actually provides more insight, right? So maybe they'll share, okay, I now enjoy it, but it got to a point. I had to go through these steps to get to this point. And so you actually receive even more beyond that. So thank you for sharing that. I didn't get your name. What was your name?
It's Matthew.
Matthew? Okay. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else? Another question?
One that I think is helpful at networking events is truly, what brought you here today? I feel like that gives a lot of extra context to what you might have in common, what their reasons are for being here. And I feel like that really helps. Again, this is more at a networking event, but I feel like that's a helpful piece of advice for the future.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so I have some suggestions on the next slide. Sometimes even just asking about the culture, right? So it's like, hey, what is the culture like? Sometimes you can share about the roles you're interested in. So it might not be really like what they're hiring for, but like what you're interested in. And hopefully the person that you're talking to and the employer or the industry professional is in that role or has hired for it before. And asking specific questions like, what can I do to prepare, right? So it's still not really transactional. Matthew shared the third one, which is what the employer likes or enjoys, right? So employer or industry professional. Sometimes what helps if you're talking to, and the last one is more like maybe a recruiter, is maybe asking about the vision and objectives of the company and where it's going. So these are just some questions or some guided questions or topics that you can start off. But definitely after really establishing that rapport and really getting to know that person when it comes to informational interviewing. But even beyond that, maybe it's like a virtual interview or even an encounter with a recruiter. These are some guided questions or topics that you can move towards. And definitely I can answer more questions near the end of the workshop as well.
Yeah, and I'm curious too. So from this audience, I know we've talked a lot about informational interviewing. If you've been to any of the past career forums, have any of you actually tried to reach out to someone to do an informational interview? Maybe raise your hand or give a thumbs up or something like that, just to see a sense of like, has anyone? So is this a new concept,
Mm.
like for everyone? So let's see.
Oh, Joshua has done it.
Okay, awesome. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I can tell you about it if you want.
Sure.
Yes, please.
I'd love to hear about it.
My cousin works at a, well, she's sort of high up in HR, so she was able to get me an informational interview over the phone with sort of their head of um, their engineering, and it was very enlightening. I found it to be more like a conversation, like you were saying, and it was very important for me to think of it more like a conversation because it's. I guess it was even easier to think it's more as a conversation because there wasn't any direct um, negative consequences to doing badly
Mm-hmm.
because it's not for a job. You're not doing or saying, well, you're not saying anything that uh, you wouldn't say in a normal conversation. And it was just an interesting way to get to know another person in industry.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And what's great about that is you made that connection, and there is potential for follow-up, right? And that's when you can ask even more specific questions and still make it a conversation.
Yep.
100%. Thank you so much, Joshua. And then Arslan also mentioned that an informational interview had been had. I don't know if they minded sharing a little bit about that. Optional.
Yeah, good morning, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah. So how did your
I
informational?
think I set up an informational interview, which can you repeat that, please?
I'm sorry. There's just a lag, so I think I said thank you. So please go ahead, and you can keep talking.
Okay, yeah. I think I set one up with Freddie Rivera from Oracle, and it was just like really informal. Like we didn't really even like sort of talk about like me getting a job. We were just like, oh, what have you done at school? What are your plans? It was just like really casual. Like it didn't really hurt either to like you five Oracle and how we moved from company to company, stuff like that.
Yeah,
That's
100%. I'm so
I love
sorry.
Oh,
Yeah, I sometimes think that it's a little scary to call it an informational interview because that sounds like it's an interview. But you're right; it's really an informational conversation. So that's a really great point.
yeah.
All right,
Thank you for sharing.
you all.
And then I think the next slides are some options. So in terms of informational interviews, networking, even reaching out, that's kind of like my next transition. And specifically on LinkedIn, because I think LinkedIn is such a powerful tool. I have some messages that can help kind of tailor your ways of reaching out. So networking beyond industry professionals, maybe networking to a job poster. So this is a message to a job poster that might have, not everyone lists that they are the job poster, but there are some positions on LinkedIn that shows who posted it. And sometimes I recommend even messaging the job poster directly. So this is an example. Does anybody want to read it out loud?
I can
read it.
Oh, okay. Yes, thank you.
Hello, Susan. Thank you for your connection. My name is Harvey Mudson, and I have recently applied for the software engineering internship position you have recently posted. Tell them why you are interested in the position and let them know why you are a unique candidate. Looking forward to hearing from you. Best, Harvey Mudson.
Awesome. Thank you. What are your thoughts on this message? It's pretty direct, right? It is a mini cover letter. Something that I always like to also point out is that this person that reached out to the job poster also applied, right? So it shows that additional commitment and interest in the position. So instead of, hey, I'm interested in the software engineering internship, this person actually went above that step and applied and shared that they applied. And then the second section is really just a brief summary or pitch of why you'd be a good candidate and also why you're interested. And then definitely sending your regards. So this is an example. Again, you don't have to do exactly like this, but it's another way to get that person's attention, is kind of following up on top of application or on top of applying. The next example is a message to a complete stranger. So I actually received a message very similar to this. It was a student that was interested in, I changed up a few things, but it was a student that was interested in working at our company. So this is an actual example. Anyone else want to try reading this? No worries, I'll read it. Okay.
I can read it. Hello, Susan. Thank you for your connection. My name is Harvey Mudson, and I am an engineering student at Harvey Mudd College and am exploring a career in aerospace. I came across your profile on LinkedIn and would love to learn more about your career path and any advice you would give to a student interested in this career. Would you be willing to speak with me on the phone for 15 or 20 minutes? Looking forward to hearing from you. Best, Harvey Mudson.
Yes. So again, something I would point out is the last part. They're not asking for 45 minutes. They're not asking for an hour. This person is also not asking to meet up, right? There's some people that are like, hey, can we grab coffee? But this really is low commitment. And really, it just shows that this person just wants to learn about their career path, and they're making it about the person they reached out to. And any advice. So really just trying to gain that insight. And that kind of goes back to our conversation on informational interviewing. I love the topic of informational conversation. I'm going to say that moving forward. But again, it's about that person and how they got to that point or place in their life and what we can learn from that. And the next one is message to an alumni. So I went to Biola University, so I actually received this message from a student that was currently attending, and she was really interested in connecting with Biola alumni. So something she said was, it's very similar to everything we just talked about. She's introducing herself. She wants to connect with Biola alumni working in HR. She told me when she's graduating that she's trying to gain as much information as possible. And really, she just wanted to set up a time to meet or talk on the phone. I love that she gave me that option to ask any questions about my work as a recruiter. Because of the way she approached me and that alumni connection and having that common interest already, I was very open to talking to her and speaking with her. That short conversation led to actually about 45 minutes of really answering all of her questions that she might have regarding HR and recruiting. I brought in a colleague to that phone call that did a different kind of recruiting so that she would have even more options to connect with. And then on top of that, I connected to her with an HR generalist so that she can also learn more about HR, not just recruiting. So hopefully all alumni are doing this. Not maybe some, maybe not, but it really doesn't hurt to reach out to alumni because from my experience in working career services and now being back in talent acquisition, I am usually have come across alumni that really want to give back to their students. And I actually even went to your networking breakfast before the Career Expo in early spring. And there were a lot of alumni that came back to speak to your to students from Cal Poly. So again, you might not always receive a response, but it really doesn't hurt to approach alumni and really ask them about their career path and life after Cal Poly as well. And then the next one.
So I have a quick question
Yes.
actually about reaching out. So do you have any recommendations for things that are maybe pet peeves of yours as people have cold reached out to you over LinkedIn or over email? What would be some things to be aware of to not do?
Yeah, so the reason why I posted this one message to the job poster and highlighted recently applied is it is a pet peeve of mine if you haven't applied and you just telling me you're interested in the position. Because I usually respond by saying, hey, the first step would be to apply. And then we will, look at your application accordingly and respond accordingly. So really it does help when you've already applied before reaching out to a job poster, specifically a job poster or for specifically a role. I think that's my biggest pet peeve, to be honest. In terms of stranger, really approaching it to be more about the conversation rather than a transactional language. I've actually received messages from people that just ask me what technologies you use straight up, right? Not really introducing themselves, not asking me, or telling me they came across my LinkedIn profile, research Liferay. It's just a straight question about what technologies do you use. And this advice is really can be applicable even in person, right? So when you go to career expos or when you're going to in-person networking events or virtual networking events, really being thoughtful about your questions and seeing if you've done anything on your end first to initiate that conversation.
Yeah, I really like that. And I can't remember what podcast or I was listening to, but they were saying, they were sharing a story about, I think it was Chris Rock, and how his car had stopped working or something. And so he was on the side of the road trying to get his car to start. And so he was trying to flag down someone for help. And then finally he rolled up his sleeves and started, looking like he was actively working to fix the problem. And then without even asking, people started to pull over to see how they could help. And so I think how that translates here is people in general, I think, like to help people who are trying to help themselves. So if you can give that context of I've already done all of the Googleable research I could on Liferay. I saw your profile and saw we had X, Y, and Z in common. I'm really interested in finding out more about, whatever it is. And I think being specific about why you're approaching them and then, what you need, 15 or 20 minutes on the phone or what have you.
Yes, that's a great example. And that applies to anything, right? I would say even specifically career expos, because you have even more time to research who's coming to your campus and really picking out those companies you really want to talk to and doing your research beforehand. So that when you do have that 5 to 10 minute conversation with the hiring manager or the recruiter, it doesn't really have to be about things that you could have found out on the website.
Yes, 100%. And yeah, so career fairs and these outreaches over LinkedIn, over email, you always, I think, want to come across as prepared, because it's really about making that good first impression, or not to make an impression in a negative way.
Yes, it's true. And the messages that usually catch my eye when it's about jobs or roles are the ones that are more tailored, and it's not just about finding a job at Liferay. It's really just, hey, I see that Liferay is passionate about open source, or you have a really strong company culture. I had a chance to watch your 4-minute culture video, and I was very intrigued by your company culture. I would love to learn more about that. When it's more tailored to the company, that's when it catches my attention, and I'm sure that's the case for recruiters as well, outside of Liferay or outside of the tech industry.
Thank you so much, Grace.
Yeah. So I wanted to bring up the topic of virtual interviews. For those who are actively job searching, now a lot of the transition has been virtual, whether it's video, phone. It has transitioned because of the current crisis. So I just want to give you some tips if you are to move forward to the next rounds on how to best prepare for a virtual interview. So next slide. So virtual interviews, these are very basic, but sometimes it really helps. Checking your Wi-Fi before your video interview or your audio interview, making sure audio and all settings are set and ready. I would even recommend arriving early to check for any technical difficulties, really just testing it out. 10 minutes even helps, 10 to 15. And another thing that to consider is lighting. So if you plan to interact with employers via video, make sure to keep lighting and positioning in mind, because sometimes positioning, maybe you want a clean background so it's not as distracting. In terms of lighting, we want to see your face, especially if they are conducting a video interview. So those are just some things to keep in mind, and it helps to really check all of those things beforehand. So by the time it is time for the interview, it also just shows that you're prepared. So that's kind of like your lobby, right? So if it's not in person, this is the way you can prepare, is when you drive to the employer site. I know you come a little bit early, you check parking, you kind of check you're dressed to impress. Those are things that can still be applied in a virtual setting. It's just making sure your technology is working, your sound is working, so that it can be as smooth as possible in the beginning.
I'm curious about something, actually. So obviously people are increasingly using Zoom backgrounds and kind of having fun with that. Do you have any feedback on what you would say would be a good, like, professional virtual background to use, or maybe some do's and don'ts around that?
Yeah, some virtual backgrounds that I think are fine are things that are maybe relevant to the role you're applying for. Second is maybe even like your school, so your alma mater, so they see, you're a student still. And then for non-virtual, I would say, yeah, just having if you can find a space where there are no distractions. I know that's not always the case for everyone, but at least keeping in mind of sound, maybe telling your roommates or family members, hey, I have an interview coming up. Can I use this room? And if you were to use this room, hey, can you keep quiet for 1 hour or 2 hours? So really even informing your roommates, because those are now things that you have to consider when you're conducting an interview. It's not like going to an on-site and having that luxury of being in a quiet conference room. Yeah, so I think those are some Zoom backgrounds I would say might be appropriate, and also just really a quiet space with no distractions.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So following up, next slide, please. How soon is too soon? Does anybody want to answer? And this can be in the context of after an interview, after an informational interview, after a networking event. So just in the context, like how soon is too soon? What do you guys think? Never too soon. Yeah, never too soon. That's a good answer.
Sujala, go ahead. You need me to unmute you.
Yeah. So, like once I tried to email them back after 1 week, but I thought that was like maybe right time, like the same week actually, but I never heard back from most of them. So
Mm.
I don't know if that is too late or uh, like, can I just email them the very next day? Would that be okay?
Yeah, so great question. It really depends on the timing. Timing is key, and that's something I'll share. Um, let's say you spoke to that person or you met that person, whether it's a virtual setting or a networking event. I think 24 to 48 hours of follow-up is just fine. Another thing is LinkedIn is a very easy access. So even adding them on LinkedIn helps right away. I appreciate it when students or people I've met in any networking setting adding me on LinkedIn or following me up on LinkedIn because, again, LinkedIn is that powerful networking tool that gives us that freedom to reach out to people that we've never met or met just once. And also it kind of is a friendly reminder, right? Especially for networking events, you're meeting a lot of people. Recruiters are constantly talking to a lot of different candidates across different roles and different verticals. So really just a friendly reminder is helpful, 24 to 40 hours. I would say even for a virtual interview, so let's say you did a virtual interview with the recruiter, again, 24 to 48 hours helps. If you haven't heard back, reach out 5 to 7 days. So like a week after. And another thing is, let's say you already had the interview. I would say at least for an formal interview with hiring managers, again, soon is also helpful, 24 to 48 hours, because it also refreshes their mind. Okay, I just interviewed this person. Okay, yes, I need to get the feedback. So, I would say that is like kind of like the helpful range. If you haven't heard back, it does help to follow up again, maybe within that 5 to 7 days since your first outreach.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. I get this question a lot where it's, is it too soon? Should I follow up at all? I don't want to bother anyone. I don't want to come across as like wanting it too much or too eager.
Like eager, yeah.
But I do think it's a great idea to follow up. I mean, a thank you note, I would say a thank you email I would say it's mandatory. So do it. Absolutely do it. I think I've shared this with most of you before, but I've been on a hiring panel before where we saw that someone didn't send a thank you note. And so that was the reason why we didn't offer them the position. Everything else about their interview was good, but everything else being equal, everyone else sent a thank you note. They probably didn't want it enough is what we decided. So truly send a thank you note. And then I think that you don't have to come across as too eager by following up, as Ray said, maybe in another week, waiting another business week to reach out again, and just letting them know in a really short, kind of respectful way that you're still interested and looking forward to hearing from them. I think that's absolutely fine.
Yes, exactly. And then the next slide has a few tips. So this is a mix of everything. So the first one is, if you haven't already, and I shared this in our earlier slides, apply to the roles directly before reaching out to the employer. Second is really thanking them for their time, and then reminding them why you might be a good fit, especially because employers may talk to a lot of candidates throughout the session, and session meaning maybe a recruiting panel or recruiting sessions, or even just events like these. And then the third really is timing. So timing is truly key. Most employers are talking to multiple candidates at once for a role. So it does help to really reach out in a timely manner, so that they are, keeping you in the loop, and then you're also keeping them in the loop and showing your interest. And then I just want to spend the next couple of minutes just sharing who we are. You may have never heard of Liferay, but our mission is to make technologies useful for people. We are a business-to-business company. The next slide shares a little bit more about our overview. We have been around since 2004. Our HQ is in Diamond Bar, so partnering with Cal Poly has been awesome, and even going to the career fair was such a short commute. But Liferay is a global company. We have 24 offices in 18 different countries. We have more than 1,800 enterprise subscriptions customers. They're all businesses. And we are an open source company, and we've had 6 million worldwide downloads. So people have access to our code. We have a free version online that people can implement, play around. But the way we grow our business is actually through our services and with our partners and our customers. And then the next slide shows some businesses that we've worked with and that we continue to work with, and people who have chosen us to be a partner. So we actually work with industries across banking and healthcare, all the way to insurance. And below that are some of the clients we've worked with in the past. And the next slide, just wanted to point out, we have been named a leader in our industry. We've actually recently also been named for 2020, so it's been 10 years in a row for our digital experience platform. And one of our values is actually to produce excellence on top of serving our customers and providing solutions. So we want to keep evolving alongside technology and serve our customers and serve our customer base and our partners. And if you have any other questions, please let me know. Again, kind of going back to adding me on LinkedIn and reaching out, feel free to. You can email me at grace.kim@liferay.com. And you can also add me on LinkedIn. It's Grace Kim. And you can just type in Liferay and you'll be able to find me. But I'll open up the floor for any questions that you might have.
First and foremost, thank you, Grace, so much. I think it's really helpful to see a presentation as well to accompany what you're sharing about follow-up, about job search tips, about networking, about what's maybe too soon for follow-up. I think all of those examples were really helpful for me to see your perspective as a recruiter. So thank you again for your
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
So at this point, if you want to unmute or if you want to raise your hand, absolutely feel free to. Or I can ask the question for you if you want to leave it in the chat. Okay, take a look.
You're welcome, Jiheng. Oh, that's a good question. Yeah.
So Sujala asked, how differently do international students need to approach a recruiter?
Yeah, that's a great question. So most recruiters, depending on the industry, but I think across industries, should be asking if you are authorized to work in the United States. As much transparency as possible is helpful because then the recruiters know how to best approach the application process for an international student. There are companies out there that do sponsor or do accept OPT or CPT. Every company is different. Unfortunately, Liferay doesn't sponsor or hire international students, but I know that there are companies out there that do that. So as much transparency on your end and also on the recruiter's end is helpful because at least we can be on the same page and see if there is a possibility for you at that company. So hopefully that answers your question. I know it was a little vague, but I think the best way is as much transparency as possible.
So I'm curious too. I actually have a friend I know who works at Liferay, and so he was sharing some of the fun things that your company's been doing in meetings just to sort of keep the team spirit alive. So I'm curious, what do you enjoy about working at Liferay since you've been there?
Like currently with the virtual situation? Okay, yeah. So you know, it's been a transition for me. I am, and you know, I know introverts are going through the same thing, but I am a very strong extrovert. If you guys ever taken Myers-Briggs, I think I hit like the higher percentage rate. So for me, my energy comes from, it doesn't even have to be a long or deep conversation. My energy actually comes from small conversations or encounters, even in the kitchen, right? And it might be a coworker that I barely talk to or I don't even work in the same department as, but those are different interactions that actually really energizes me. So personally for me, it has been quite a transition, but something that's helpful for me has been just really still having fun in the midst of all of this. So we have a rule for our personal team, for our HR team. On Fridays, we have a coffee tea time at 9 o'clock. The rule is not talking about Corona and not talking about work. So we talk about we don't talk about those two things, those two rules. So we actually just share what's going on in our lives, our hobbies that we picked up, and also kind of takes us out of the current situation, right? And also tries to have that small talk that we usually would have had in the office. But because we are inundated with Zoom meetings and with hiring managers or other team players, it's hard not to talk about Corona. It's hard not to talk about work. So having those set rules have been very helpful for me. So it might not sound fun, but it's fun for me because we don't have to talk about those things.
No, yeah, I think that's great. I love that we're all trying to find other ways to connect with each other. So what my friend had shared is that they actually play like draw games, kind of like Drawful or Words with Friends type thing on meetings, just for team building. And I thought that was so sweet. Like I just really liked that there was just time for play in the meeting. So.
Yeah. Some of the teams do different things according to their interests. Our team also, we really wanted to thank our bosses recently. So we actually created like a Zoom meeting skit and we impersonated our bosses. So that was really fun to still do something fun and interact with each other, but also thank our bosses for everything they've been doing.
No, that's great. Okay, are there any other final questions? Please don't feel shy. If you want to just put it in the chat, even privately to me if you don't want me to say, who you are. Totally fine.
I have a question, Alexis.
Sure.
Hi, Grace. This is Lily Gossage. I'm the director of the Maximizing Engineering Potential Program. Thanks for being here for our students. You got a wonderful turnout. Can you give us, the students, some tips on when they're approaching a faculty member for a resume? Oftentimes, I will get a request for recommendation or reference, and I'm not given enough adequate time, or I don't know who the student is. And, it's really important that our students are very engaged and working closely with faculty, but sometimes it may take upwards of a month to write a very good recommendation letter. So what's your position on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really appreciate that. So every company is different, but I will kind of share my background in reference checks. Usually it's really a 10-minute phone call. I did notice it is hard to get a hold of faculty when I am conducting reference checks for entry-level candidates or intern candidates. But for the most part, I've just been following up personally. So it does help when the student gets a follow-up, like, hey, this person might be calling you in the next couple of days. Please reach out for that phone call. I also call them, I email them. I also email them an attachment if they don't want to jump on a call with me, so they can just answer the questions themselves and just send it back. What's been also helpful for me is if it is a faculty member and it's specifically like an engineering faculty member, and that's usually the case for me because a lot of our entry-level candidates are from an engineering background. I've also had an opportunity for myself to even network with faculty. So, hey, they love this student, and they're like, there are more students like that, like him or her. I would love to partner with you and create a pipeline. So I've had actually multiple conversations where those references have turned into a networking call with that faculty member as well.
Thank you so much, Grace. That helps too. I hadn't really thought about how difficult it might be to get a hold of people when you're doing the background checks, which is a really important piece. So, so yeah, I mean, to piggyback off of that, I would say on my end, when I've had reference checks done, it has been this matter of checking in, thanking them again for being willing to, just seeing, you know, is there anything that I can do to help coordinate at all. Usually there isn't, but just that proactive kind of mindset, I think. So Sujala asks, how do we negotiate about pay? Great.
Yeah, that is a great question. I have a question for you. Are you a current student or alumni? And then entry level or mid-level? Alumni, mid-level. Awesome. So something that I recommend, and hopefully recruiters are already telling you in the first couple of conversations what the range is, but I'm going to start there. At least in California, you are allowed to ask what the range is. That is in your candidate control. You have power in that. So I do empower you to ask, you know, what the pay range is for the role, and depending on the range, if it does match what you're looking for, hopefully you also know what the lower range of that is and the higher range, and that's something that you can keep in mind when you are negotiating. Let's say the offer stage happens and you are presented with an offer that you're not maybe happy with completely, or you're thrown off guard, asking them, how did you reach this decision? Can you explain more? And it could be because of your skill set. It could be because they don't want you to reach a ceiling and they want you to have growth within the company. So even also considering kind of like that holistic mindset, because, you know, it's an opportunity. It's not always about the compensation. Benefits also come into play. There are some companies that cover 100%. There are companies that only cover partial. So that's another thing to keep in mind when you are negotiating, is the holistic aspect of the package, because negotiating is not really just the salary, it's beyond that.
Thanks so much, Sujala. That's a great question. And I mean, truthfully, we give entire workshops on negotiating salary because there's kind of a lot that goes into the research behind it. And thanks so much, Grace, for sharing that, you know, and empowering everyone on the chat today to ask about the range if you want to know that information earlier on. I think that's a helpful thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, and another thing that helps is definitely doing your research. Glassdoor has averages depending on your level. So even doing your research on that and seeing that market level, and also knowing your worth, right? So that's really big. So knowing your worth early on helps in the process, and having those expectations set. And in the end of the process, thinking of it holistically in terms of the company, the opportunity, the growth, and then also seeing like, okay, how does that match your skill level and your career trajectory?
Awesome. Grace, thank you so much. I love getting to work with you here today. It has been a lot of fun and just really great advice. So thank you so much. And this is going to be recorded. I'll send it out in a link or an embedded YouTube link in a future newsletter. So for everyone in the room, you know, please be on the lookout for that. But I know you all have to get to class. Thank you again so much for being here. I really appreciate you prioritizing this. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for listening. Feel free to connect with me. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might you weren't able to ask today. But again, thank you. And I wish you guys all the best of luck.
I'm going to go ahead.